Now available in paperback and Kindle Unlimited, Isis, Imitation of Life. The Goddess Next Door helps a young black girl overcome racism during the era of Jim Crow in this Golden Age Isis series adventure. Get Isis, Imitation of Life in paperback and Kindle Unlimited today. I've been following this whole Eric Esqival situation, and I don't know what's more troubling. The inappropriate sexual behavior Eric Esqival is alleged to have participated in, or the efforts by many in the comic book industry, such as comic book editors and comic pros, to cover it up, and the efforts made by the comic book industry's journalism community to cover it up. And your Eric Esqival is the writer of the DC Vertigo title Border Town. And while I have my issues with this title and the way it promotes racist propaganda, I look at this whole situation and I see a situation that is far more troubling. Now, your Eric Esqival is alleged to have participated in some inappropriate sexual behavior with, I believe it was a minor, and this behavior was known by many in the comic book industry before they even hired him. So I'm looking at the overall state of the industry, and it's one that literally is promoting a culture of dysfunction, because in a professional publishing industry, if an individual is known to have participated in inappropriate sexual conduct, that person would not be considered for employment by a publisher out of fear of having their reputation damaged or having to deal with a recall of products with this author's name on it. So when I look at these editors and these people in charge of DC and Vertigo, I see where there's a culture of problems, and that culture of problems we could see go on with the whole Eddie Berganza situation, where your Eddie Berganza was allowed to continue keeping his job even after allegations of sexual harassment were known and not dealt with. When I look at that from the business perspective, it's clear to me that human resources wasn't doing its job in the screening of Eric Esqival, nor was it doing a job of checking out this author's background before they hired him for this job. And that's one of the ways they've completely mishandled this situation. Now, the other way the industry has mishandled this situation is not by going through proper channels. Now, this female who made these allegations against Eric Esqival, she made those allegations through social media. And when someone makes allegations through social media, I find those allegations to be suspect, because if this Eric Esqival had been participating in this behavior, it was clearly criminal behavior, and you would think someone would go to law enforcement first in order to make sure that this individual does not participate in this type of conduct ever again. And this is one of the reasons why I find these allegations to be suspect, because if someone, again, is violated in the way that Eric Esqival is alleged to have violated this young female, again, I would think that they would want to get law enforcement involved, and they would want to get law enforcement involved in order to bring this party to trial and to make sure that this individual does not harm anyone in the exact same way they were harmed. Moreover, I would think they would want to take this matter to law enforcement so that they could effectively deal with it, because law enforcement can objectively assess the situation and then ruminate charges against the individual that can be dealt with in court. Because to just go through social media shows that there is something a little off about things, and this denies your Eric Esqival his due process under the law. And that's what anyone who wants to stop sexual harassment, sexual assault, or pedophilia or sexual deviant behaviors would want to do, is, again, make sure that this person is brought to justice and that this person has their day in court where they can get due process under the law, and that this case can be tried by a judge and a jury of that individual's peers. Because with these allegations, your Eric Esquivel, by law, is innocent until proven guilty, and he deserves to have his day in court in spite of what many comic fans feel about him, because our feelings aren't as important as the laws of our United States Constitution. And that's the most important thing that everyone needs to think about regarding this whole Eric Esquivel situation, is that this female made these allegations just like many of these women in the Me Too movement made their allegations on social media, created this firestorm of controversy, but she did not go out here and try to take legal action to deal with this situation and adjudicate it in our court system, which is, again, Mr. Esquivel's right under the U.S. Constitution. And that's one of the things I find to be wholly suspect about the situation. The other thing I have a real issue with regarding this whole Eric Esquivel situation is the way the comic book press has completely mishandled the situation. Many of the comic book press websites like your Newsarama, Comic Book Resources, the Mary Sue, Your Bleeding Cool, they are not reporting on this whole controversy. And that's really troubling, because if we are supposed to have freedom of the press needs to be reporting on matters that are going on, and they need to be reporting on those matters because that's their job. As the press, it is their job to not only report the good news going on in the comic book industry, but it is also their job to report the bad news that is going on as well. Because if you have a free press, they have to be objective, and they have to be objective enough to report the stories that reflect what is going on in the industry, and they have to be able to objectively report stories in a fair and balanced way. And the efforts that they're going to bury Eric Esquivel's allegations of sexual misconduct are quite troubling, because it shows that there's a serious ethics issue as related to comic book journalism and journalism in the comic book industry, because a seasoned journalist, again, is going to report the facts of a case, whether they be positive or negative, and they're not going to be making efforts to bury any parts of the story. So when I see multiple comic book journalism websites burying a potential scandal that could impact the industry, that's something that I find to be extremely troubling about the comic book industry, because it shows me a really serious issue as related to ethics, just like I see the serious issue as related to ethics, as related to the way editorial has handled the whole Eric Esquivel situation. Because any sort of manager who has any sense of ethics, again, would not be trying to bury this individual. In fact, they would have checked this individual's background out, checked out their references, and made sure that this individual's background did not have anything in it that would hurt the overall industry or the brand of DC Comics or Vertigo Comics. That's what a professional and seasoned editor-in-chief and publisher would do before signing off on a green light for a comic project featuring this writer. They would want to go and do things like check out this writer's previous blogs, check out this writer's previous published work, check out this writer's previous work references, and they would use all of that as a foundation for hiring this individual, because it is all of their past behaviors and past publications that would be used as one of the promotional tools towards selling their work. So when I look at this whole Eric Esquivel situation, there's a serious issue as related to hiring, as related to management, and as related to ethics at DC Comics and Vertigo. And there's also a really serious issue as related to the whole ethics inside of journalism in the comic book industry. And that's something that many people aren't really talking about, because everyone is approaching the whole Eric Esquivel situation from emotion, and they're not approaching it from logic. As someone who approaches business with the SJS Direct imprint from a very, very objective perspective, I can look at this whole situation and just see where Vertigo, DC Comics is making mistakes. I can see where the comic book journalism part of the industry is making mistakes, and I can see where many comic fans are making mistakes. Now, I know a lot of people, they have their issues with Eric Esquivel regarding the way he writes this Border Town comic in this extremely far leftist narrative, and this extremely, as I see it after reading several of the comics, racist narrative. But we live in a country where we the people have free rights, and even your Eric Esquivel has a right to those freedoms, even though he does not really, I believe, appreciate those freedoms. And one of those freedoms, again, is that right to be innocent until proven guilty, a right to due process under the law, and a right to a fair and speedy trial if these allegations are proven to be true by law enforcement, because I believe that this case really needs to be taken in and dealt with by law enforcement, not by members of the comic book community. Because yes, they did take, DC and Vertigo did take constructive action to protect their professional image by terminating Mr. Esquivel and then canceling the Border Town comic, which is what any professional business is going to do. But I believe that the whole culture of dysfunction is not being constructively dealt with in this situation. Because if this whole culture was being dealt with in a constructive situation, these allegations that were made, the first thing that the editors would be doing is saying, we need to take this to law enforcement, one, because that's not our area of expertise. If something went on with this Eric Esquivel, we need to be taking this to law enforcement, one, and then two, we really need to deal with this whole culture of sexual misconduct, and we also have to deal with background checks and reference checks for new hires to ensure that their behavior reflects what is represented of a brand. Because if I was expanding my own SJS Direct imprint, I would be making sure that my employees maintained a certain level of professionalism inside and outside of their work on the imprint, because their behavior would reflect on the SJS Direct imprint. So again, I would be checking their references and their backgrounds out. And for people to know that this Eric Esquivel participated in this type of behavior, and then to give it a indifferent or a side eye or not pay it any attention, that to me is far more troubling than your Eric Esquivel situation, because it's individuals like this that enable this type of culture to go on inside of a business, and it's these type of individuals that give a pass to this type of inappropriate conduct that allow a culture of sexual harassment and sexual assault to go on. Because if you don't deal with the culture, then what's going to happen is that culture is going to go on. This is something that I talk about in my novel, The Temptation of John Haynes, as related to the whole culture of racial profiling, is that you cannot just go after the individuals who participate in the behavior. You have to go after the individuals who create the culture, because it's the people at the top who create the culture of sexual harassment, sexual assault, and sexual misconduct that allow people to get a pass for this behavior. And it's that pass that they give that allows this culture to fester. So you have to deal with the culture, not just the individual. And in order to do that, you need to have a shakeup at the top as related to dealing with that individual. And that individual, once you take the head out, the body falls right behind it. So you have to deal with that culture very effectively, and you also have to deal with the culture by further retraining all of your workers. Now, the other issue, again, that I have with this whole Eric Esquivel situation relates to the ethics in comics journalism, because in journalism, again, a journalist has to be objective. And to say that you're not going to cover certain stories, that's something that I find to be quite troubling. That means that there was collusion by these comic websites to cover up this whole Eric Esquivel situation. And that's not something that we really want to see. It's sad that other comic YouTubers had to come out and talk about this situation first, and it wasn't comic journalists, because again, a journalist's job is to report the news, whether it be good news or bad news. Their job is to report and then let the public decide what they think about that situation. And that's one of those things that I found to be quite troubling about this whole Eric Esquivel situation, was the lack of ethics as related to these comic book journalism websites like your Newsarama, like your Mary Sue, and like your Comic Book Resources, and like your Bleeding Cool. It's just showing me that they're more interested in winning the attention, approval, and favor of these comic book editors rather than doing their journalistic duty and maintaining the integrity of the free press. As a publisher, I value the freedom of press, because if it wasn't for that First Amendment freedom of the press, we would not be able to hear the truth about the state of our country and hear the things that we don't like, because sometimes we do need to hear what we don't like. And that's one of the most important parts of the First Amendment, is that it protects the speech that we don't like so that the other person can present a counterpoint to people. And when we have groups of people in journalism going out here, covering up incidents, that's something that is extremely troubling as related to the press of the comic book industry. Because if we don't have people out here being objective, reporting the facts, and then letting people know what is going on as related to the facts, then we're not getting a clear picture. And if they can do this with this individual, Eric Esquivel, I shudder at what they would do as related to things, as related to the declining sales numbers of the comic book industry, or dealing with things as related to the overall state of the comic book industry. Because it seems like these journalists, they are burying their heads in the sand, or they're too busy kissing butts of editors and chiefs to think about the compromises they are making to their integrity as journalists. As a blogger, as a writer, and again as a publisher, I value our First Amendment, I value our freedom of the press, and I believe any sort of person who values that First Amendment, they are going to value that responsibility that's given to them, and they're going to make every effort to give everyone the objective facts in their journalism. So when I look at this whole situation, it is very troubling on many levels, and it shows many of the problems we have in the comic book industry on many levels. Because when you have people in the industry covering up things, colluding, to cover up things and hiding things. That shows us how ineffective and weak the leadership of the comic book industry is, how unethical it is, how directionless it is, and why this industry is in dire straits. Because if you cannot deal with an individual like this in a professional manner, it just shows that there is no leadership at these companies that's making efforts to protect, again, the employees or protect the rights that they have been given responsibilities over regarding our free press, our free media, and it just shows us how bad things are in our comic book industry. Now, I look at this whole Eric Esqival situation. This is just another incident in the tip of what I call a very big iceberg as related to the comic book industry. It's clear to me that there is a desperate need for some type of publishing professional to come in here and take the lead, take control over things, and make efforts to set a new direction for the industry. Because for this individual to get into a job and become a writer of a comic without any sort of vetting, any sort of screening, that shows me that standards in the industry have fallen, and standards have fallen to an all-time low. If you'd like to see me make more videos like this, you can donate to my Patreon by clicking the link in the description box. And if you want to try some of my SJS Direct publications, like the ISIS series, the E-Steam series, the John Haynes series, The Temptation of John Haynes, and the Spinsterella trilogy, you may do so by clicking the link to Amazon.com. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe.